In a world where dreams are the currency of control, a group of strangers awakens to find their nightmares have become a chilling reality. Trapped in a sinister experiment, they must unravel the truth before it unravels them. Welcome to the edge of sleep, where the line between the mind's darkest corners and reality blurs. The moment I heard about the clinical trial, it felt like a lifeline had been thrown my way. You see, insomnia had become my closest companion, a relentless force that shadowed every step I took. Nights stretched endlessly, a barren expanse of time where sleep refused to grace me with its presence. So, when the opportunity arose to participate in what was heralded as a groundbreaking treatment for my condition, I didn't hesitate. My younger brother Alex, equally ensnared by sleepless nights, joined me. Together, we harbored a cautious optimism, daring to dream of the night when sleep would no longer be an elusive phantom. The journey to the remote research facility was shrouded in a palpable sense of mystery. Nestled in the heart of nowhere, it stood as a beacon of modern science, its sleek architecture a stark contrast to the wild, untamed landscape that surrounded it. As Alex and I crossed its threshold, we were greeted by a team of researchers whose smiles were as sterile as the white walls that enclosed us. They spoke of the trial with a fervor that was infectious, painting vivid pictures of the life that awaited us on the other side of their experimental treatment. A life where the night was no longer a battlefield, but a haven of rest and rejuvenation. We were introduced to the other volunteers, each a weary traveler on the same tortuous journey through the realm of sleeplessness. There was a silent camaraderie among us, an unspoken understanding that we were all adrift in the same turbulent sea, clinging to the hope that this trial would be our anchor. The first night after receiving the treatment was nothing short of miraculous. For the first time in what felt like eons, sleep enveloped me in its warm embrace, a gentle tide that pulled me under into the sweet abyss of unconsciousness. I awoke feeling reborn, a sensation so foreign yet deeply craved. Alex's eyes mirrored my own relief, a spark of life reignited within us. But as the days progressed, the promise that had been so fervently made by the research team began to unravel. Shadows crept into our sanctuary, tainting the gift of sleep with a poison that twisted dreams into nightmares. It was subtle at first, a disquiet that whispered at the edge of our minds, but it grew, fed by something sinister that lurked beneath the surface of the trial. We were unaware then, Alex and I, of the descent that awaited us. Unaware of the darkness that would soon swallow the light of our hope whole. But in that moment, standing on the precipice of discovery, we still believed in the promise. The promise of sleep, of rest, of a life reclaimed from the clutches of insomnia. How naive we were to think that nightmares could be banished so easily. How tragically wrong we were to believe in the promise of a cure. The first day felt like stepping into the future. The facility was a labyrinth of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the world I had left behind. I remember the clinical smell that hung in the air, sterile and impersonal, as they led us through the corridors to the heart of the experiment. It was there, in a room that looked more like a scene from a science fiction movie than a medical trial, that they administered the first dose of what they promised would be the cure to our endless nights. As the drug coursed through my veins, I felt an odd sense of detachment, as if I were floating just outside of my body, watching the scene unfold. The researchers watched us closely, their eyes flickering between their notes and our faces, searching for any sign of the miracle they hoped to witness. Alex, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand, a silent signal of our shared hope and fear. That first night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, the soft hum of the facility around me, sleep came with an ease I had forgotten was possible. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that envelopes you completely, erasing the boundaries between consciousness and oblivion. I awoke feeling rejuvenated, a sensation so alien it brought tears to my eyes. Alex was the same, the shadows under his eyes, which had seemed permanent, had lightened, replaced by a cautious spark of vitality. The days that followed were a blur of tests and observations. We were poked and prodded, monitored and measured, as the researchers sought to understand the effects of the treatment. The facility became our world, a sterile bubble detached from the reality outside its walls. In those early days, the promise of the trial still shone brightly, a beacon of hope that led us forward. But as the experiment progressed, the atmosphere began to shift. The initial sense of camaraderie among us volunteers, forged in the shared experience of our first night's rest, started to fray at the edges. Whispers of side effects began to circulate, tales of nightmares so vivid they left one of us shaking for hours after waking. Yet, in those moments, we still clung to the hope that the end of our journey through the night was in sight, that these were merely hurdles on the path to our cure. Looking back, I realized how naive we were. We had placed our trust so willingly in the hands of strangers, believing in the sanctity of their promise. We were desperate, yes, but in our desperation, we had failed to see the experiment for what it truly was, a gamble. A roll of the dice with our minds and bodies as the stakes. The facility, with its cold, unyielding surfaces, began to feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. The researchers, once our saviors, now seemed distant, their reassurances empty as the side effects grew more pronounced. It was in this changing tide that I began to understand the true nature of our situation. We were not just volunteers in a clinical trial. We were subjects in an experiment whose parameters extended far beyond the boundaries of ethics and compassion. As the experiment continued, the promise of the trial began to unravel, revealing the harsh truth beneath. We had embarked on this journey seeking salvation from our sleepless nights, but as the days passed, it became clear that what we had found was something far darker. As the days melded into one another, the initial euphoria of sleep began to fade, replaced by a creeping unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. The facility, once a beacon of hope, started to feel more like a cage, its sterile walls closing in on me. It was in the quiet moments, in the dead of night, that I first felt it, a shadow at the edge of my consciousness, a whisper in the dark that sleep was no longer a refuge but a doorway to something terrifying. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling as the soft hum of the facility became a cacophony in my ears. It was during one of these restless nights that I first heard Alex's voice, tinged with panic, from the bed next to mine. "Do you see them too?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I turned to face him, seeing the fear etched into his features. It was then I realized that the nightmares had begun to seep into our reality, blurring the lines between what was real and what was imagined. The researchers seemed oblivious to our growing fear, dismissing our concerns with clinical detachment. Adjustment period, they called it, a temporary side effect. But as the days passed, the nightmares grew more vivid, more visceral. I could feel them clawing at the edges of my mind, waiting for me to close my eyes and succumb to their embrace. It wasn't just me. The others felt it too. We gathered in hushed circles, sharing our experiences in whispered tones, as if speaking too loudly would make them real. There was talk of shadows moving in the dark, of voices whispering secrets meant to drive us mad. It was in these moments, sharing our fears, that I saw the true cost of our desperation for sleep. The facility's lockdown only added to our sense of isolation. The doors that once led to freedom were now sealed, the windows nothing more than portals to a world we could no longer touch. We were trapped, not just by the physical walls of the facility but by the prison of our own minds. As the shadow of the experiment grew longer, so did the rift between us. Paranoia crept in, whispering lies and sowing distrust. Accusations were thrown like daggers, each word a reflection of our own fears. It was in this atmosphere of suspicion that I realized the nightmare we faced was not just the side effects of the drug but the darkness within ourselves. The turning point came one night, in a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. I realized that the key to our salvation lay not in the hands of the researchers but within us. We needed to face the shadows, to confront the nightmares head-on. But as I rallied the others to my side, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late, that the darkness had taken root too deeply. It was then, in the depths of despair, that I made a vow to myself and to Alex. We would not let the experiment break us. We would stand together, fight the nightmares, and find a way out of the darkness. But as I looked into the eyes of my fellow volunteers, I saw the same fear reflected back at me, a mirror of my own terror. And I wondered, not for the first time, if we were fighting a battle that couldn't be won. As the experiment spiraled out of control, the nightmares began to take on a life of their own. Each night was a descent into madness, a journey through landscapes of fear that seemed to stretch the limits of our minds. The darkness we had pledged to fight became a relentless force, one that sought to consume us piece by piece. I remember one night in particular, a night when the boundary between sleep and wakefulness blurred into oblivion. I lay in my bed, the oppressive silence of the facility pressing down on me like a physical weight. It was then that I heard it, a soft, insidious whispering that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. My heart raced as I strained to understand the words, but the harder I listened, the more the whispers receded into the shadows, leaving me with a sense of dread that was palpable. The days became a blur of exhaustion and fear. We moved through the facility like ghosts, haunted by the horrors that awaited us each time we closed our eyes. The researchers watched us with a detached curiosity that only served to deepen my despair. It was as if we were nothing more than specimens in a petri dish, observed for reactions but not seen as human. Alex was struggling. The once vibrant spark in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a hollow emptiness that mirrored my own feelings of helplessness. I tried to reach out to him, to offer words of comfort, but the gulf between us had grown too wide. The nightmares had ensnared him, dragging him further away from me with each passing night. The first casualty of our descent into darkness was a young woman named Sarah. One morning, we awoke to find her bed empty, the sheets stained with cold sweat. The researchers informed us in clinical tones that she had succumbed to the effects of the drug, her heart giving out in the throes of a nightmare too terrifying to bear. Her death was a stark reminder of the stakes of our situation, a chilling indication that the experiment was a fight for survival. Panic set in, a contagious wildfire that spread among us. Accusations flew, friendships fractured, and the fragile unity we had forged in the face of our shared ordeal shattered. The facility that had once held the promise of a cure now felt like a tomb, each corner shadowed with the specter of death. In the midst of the chaos, I clung to a single thread of hope, the belief that there must be a way to end the experiment, to reverse the effects of the drug. It was this belief that drove me to search the facility, poring over notes and data left carelessly unguarded by the researchers. It was a desperate search for answers, for any clue that might offer a way out of the nightmare. The deeper I delved, the more I uncovered the dark underpinnings of the experiment. The drug was not designed to cure insomnia but to explore the depths of human fear, to push the boundaries of psychological endurance. We were not patients but test subjects in a twisted study of terror. As I pieced together the grim reality of our situation, I realized that the descent was not just a physical journey into the bowels of the facility but a metaphorical plunge into the darkest corners of our minds. The experiment had stripped us bare, revealing the primal fears that lurked within each of us. The knowledge weighed heavily on me, a burden I carried as I returned to the others. I knew that our only hope of survival lay in standing together, in facing the darkness as one. But as I looked into the faces of my fellow volunteers, I saw the depth of the despair that had taken root. The battle we faced was not just against the nightmares but against the very essence of fear itself. It was in this moment of clarity that I understood the true nature of the descent. It was not a journey through physical space but a descent into the soul, a test of our will to fight, to survive, and to reclaim the light that the darkness sought to extinguish. The revelation of the experiment's true purpose was a turning point, a fracture that split the thin veneer of hope we had clung to. As the days melded into a single, continuous nightmare, the fabric of our unity began to tear at the seams. The shadows that had once been confined to our dreams now danced in the corners of our eyes, constant reminders of the horrors we faced. I watched as paranoia took root within the group, growing like a cancer. Conversations became laced with suspicion, every glance carried the weight of unspoken accusations. We were no longer comrades in arms against a common enemy. We had become isolated islands, each person retreating into their fortress of fear. Alex's condition worsened, his moments of clarity growing rarer by the day. I tried to reach him, to pull him back from the edge of the abyss he teetered on, but my attempts felt futile. The brother I knew was slipping away, replaced by a stranger with haunted eyes. The researchers' indifference to our plight only added fuel to the fire. Their clinical observations and notes failed to capture the depth of our despair. We were lab rats in a maze, but the cheese at the end was our sanity, and it was being pulled further and further away. One by one, we began to break. A young man named Marcus, who had always been the most vocal about his optimism, succumbed to the nightmares. His screams echoed through the facility one night, a chilling symphony of fear and pain. By morning, he was gone, his bed as empty as the promises of salvation we had been fed. The facility, once a beacon of sterile, scientific hope, now felt like a prison. The sterile corridors and labs were now stages for our personal hells, each turn revealing another layer of the experiment's deceit. In a moment of desperation, I rallied those who were left. "We can't let them win," I pleaded, my voice echoing off the cold walls. "We have to stand together, to find a way out, not just for ourselves but for those we've lost." My words, meant to inspire, felt hollow in the oppressive silence that followed. It was then that we discovered Sarah's journal, hidden in a crevice of the common room. Her words, filled with fear and determination, offered a glimmer of hope. She had found something, a potential way to counteract the drug's effects, hidden in the researcher's own notes. Armed with this new knowledge, we began to work, piecing together the fragments she had left behind. It was a race against time in our own minds, a battle to hold onto the shreds of our sanity long enough to find a way out. But as we delved deeper, the fractures within us grew. Trust, once broken, proved difficult to rebuild. The darkness was not just around us, it was within us, feeding on our fear and turning us against each other. In the end, it became clear that the true enemy was not the drug, nor the researchers who had orchestrated our nightmare. The enemy was the fear that lived within each of us, a shadow that had grown too large to contain. Our battle was not for survival against the experiment, it was a fight for our souls against the darkness we carried inside. As I lay awake, staring into the void, I realized that the fractures within us might never heal. The experiment had changed us, irrevocably. The people we were before had vanished, like shadows at dawn, leaving behind strangers in their place. And so, we fought on, not just against the nightmares that plagued our sleep, but against the fractures that threatened to tear us apart. In the heart of darkness, we sought the light, not knowing if it was still within our reach. As the dim light of dawn crept through the barred windows of the research facility, a sense of ominous foreboding settled over us. The revelation in Sarah's journal had ignited a flicker of hope, but the path forward was shrouded in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. The facility had transformed in our eyes, no longer a place of scientific pursuit, it had become a labyrinthine prison designed to test the limits of our sanity. I led the way, clutching the journal close, as if it were a talisman capable of warding off the shadows that seemed to watch us from every corner. The corridors stretched before us, endless and twisting, a physical manifestation of the nightmare we were living. The air was thick with the scent of fear, a palpable presence that weighed heavily on our already burdened shoulders. "We need to find the control room," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the sound of our cautious footsteps. The control room, according to Sarah's notes, held the key to disabling the drug's effects, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. But the facility was a maze, its secrets hidden behind locked doors and coded panels that seemed to mock our desperation. As we navigated the twisting passageways, the fractures within our group became more pronounced. Paranoia and fear had eroded the fragile bonds that held us together, turning whispered conversations into accusations and doubts. Trust, once lost, was a difficult thing to rebuild, especially in a place designed to amplify our darkest fears. The deeper we delved into the labyrinth, the more the lines between reality and nightmare blurred. Shadows moved of their own accord, whispers followed us down empty hallways, and more than once, I caught glimpses of figures that vanished when looked upon directly. It was as if the facility itself was alive, a malevolent entity that delighted in our torment. Our journey was not without its casualties. We lost 2 more of our number to the darkness. One disappeared without a trace, the other succumbed to a madness that was too deep to recover from. Each loss was a blow, a stark reminder of what awaited us if we failed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we stood before the control room. The door was unmarked, its presence betrayed only by the faint hum of machinery beyond. My hands shook as I entered the code Sarah had discovered, a prayer whispered under my breath for it to work. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room bathed in the cold light of monitors and control panels. It was the heart of the labyrinth, the place where all paths converged, and our hope for salvation lay within its technological bowels. We worked together, following Sarah's instructions to the letter, each action a step towards freedom or a plunge into deeper darkness. The facility seemed to sense our purpose, its oppressive atmosphere bearing down on us as if trying to crush our spirits before we could complete our task. And then, with a final keystroke, the machinery hummed to life, a symphony of beeps and clicks that heralded the beginning of the end. The monitors flickered, displaying a sequence that would initiate the reversal of the drug's effects. It was done, We had found a way to fight back against a nightmare. But even as we celebrated our victory, I knew that the battle was far from over. The labyrinth had changed us, each turn and each shadow etching itself into our souls. We were no longer the same people who had entered the facility with hope in our hearts. We had faced our fears, navigated the darkness, and emerged on the other side, but the scars of our journey would remain with us forever. The labyrinth was behind us, but the path forward was uncertain. We had reclaimed a measure of control, a chance to escape the nightmare, but at what cost? The facility's shadows lingered in our minds, a constant reminder of the darkness we had endured. As we made our way back through the corridors, no longer a maze but a route to freedom, I couldn't help but wonder what awaited us outside. The world had moved on without us, and we were strangers, forever marked by our experience. The labyrinth might have been conquered, but the real challenge lay in finding our place in a world that had become as alien to us as we had to it. And so, we stepped into the light of a new day, not as victims but as survivors, carrying the weight of our journey like a badge of honor. The facility receded into the distance, a dark chapter in our lives that we would never forget, but from which we had emerged stronger, tempered by the fire of our ordeal. The labyrinth was behind us, but the scars it left would shape us for the rest of our lives, a constant reminder of the darkness we had faced and the light we had fought so hard to reclaim. The world outside the facility was not as I remembered it. Buildings stood taller, streets were unfamiliar, and the faces that passed by were indifferent to our presence. We were ghosts in a world that had moved on without us, our ordeal invisible to those around us. As we navigated through the city, the sense of alienation was palpable. We had emerged from one labyrinth only to find ourselves lost in another. In the days that followed, we sought to piece together the fragments of our lives, but the task was daunting. The facility had taken more from us than just time, it had altered the very fabric of our being. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and haunted by shadows. The nightmares had lessened but never fully disappeared. They lingered at the edge of our consciousness, a constant reminder of the darkness we had escaped. It was during this time of fragile recovery that the first signs of betrayal emerged. A news report flashed across the screen one evening, speaking of a breakthrough in insomnia treatment by the very corporation that had imprisoned us. The spokesperson, with a polished smile, extolled the virtues of their new drug, claiming unprecedented success rates. My blood ran cold as I listened. There was no mention of the trial, no acknowledgement of the sacrifices made or the lives lost. We were erased from the narrative, our suffering repackaged as a scientific triumph. Anger and disbelief coursed through me. The realization that our ordeal was being used to further corporate greed was a betrayal that cut deeper than any nightmare. We had been pawns in a game we never agreed to play, our lives fodder for profit. The sense of injustice was overwhelming, igniting a fire within me that I had thought the facility had extinguished. I reached out to the others, and together we decided to take action. Our experiences, though harrowing, had forged between us a bond stronger than any drug could sever. We began to organize, to speak out against the corporation and demand recognition for our ordeal. It was not an easy path. We faced skepticism, legal battles, and threats. But the more we pushed, the more we found others like us, shadows emerging from the darkness to join our cause. Our fight brought us to the steps of the corporation's headquarters on a gray, overcast day. With the media gathered, we shared our story, the truth of the trial and its aftermath. The corporation had hoped to silence us, to bury the evidence of their experiments in a labyrinth of bureaucracy and legal maneuvering. But we were no longer the frightened test subjects they had left in that facility. We were survivors, voices united in a chorus of defiance. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Investigations were launched, executives resigned, and the corporation faced a public relations nightmare. The drug was pulled from the market, and compensation was promised to those affected. It was a victory, but a hollow one. No amount of money could return what had been lost. No apology could heal the scars etched into our souls. As the dust settled, I found myself standing alone outside the now shuttered facility. The building loomed silent and imposing, a tombstone marking the graves of those we had lost. The anger had subsided, replaced by a weary resignation. The labyrinth had been conquered, but at what cost? In the end, the true betrayal was not just the corporation's greed or their manipulation of our lives. It was the realization that the world outside, in its indifference, had allowed such darkness to thrive. We had fought back, reclaimed our voices, and exposed the truth, but the shadows of the labyrinth lingered, a reminder of the fragility of the human spirit and the price of freedom. As I walked away, the facility receding into the distance, I knew that our journey had changed us in ways we were only beginning to understand. The scars we carried were not just reminders of the past, they were markers of our resilience, of our refusal to be broken. The labyrinth might have been behind us, but the path forward was ours to forge, a journey through a world that we now viewed with eyes wide open. As I stepped beyond the facility's shadow, the world unfolded before me, a canvas once familiar, now tainted with the hues of my trials. The journey hadn't merely spanned the physical distance from the facility's oppressive gates to society's bustling heart. It was an odyssey of the soul, a passage through the crucible that had forged me anew. The vibrant streets, alive with the thrum of everyday life, felt like a stage where I no longer knew my part. Each step was a reminder of the chasm between who I had become and the world that continued, oblivious to my transformation. In the weeks that followed, the struggle for reintegration was a battle against shadows. My reflection, once a known companion, had become a stranger's gaze staring back at me, a bearer of invisible scars that spoke of nights where sleep was a battleground, and dreams, a distant memory. The camaraderie forged in the dark corridors of the facility became my beacon, the only light in the dissonance of my new reality. The revelation of our story, broadcasted from the steps of the corporation that had sought to erase our existence, was a moment of catharsis. It wasn't just an act of defiance, but a declaration of our humanity, a refusal to be silenced. Our voices, once drowned in the depths of despair, now echoed across the chasms of indifference, igniting a spark in the hearts of those who had been mere spectators to our suffering. I found purpose in advocacy, channeling the anguish and betrayal into a crusade for justice. Each victory, each acknowledgement, was a piece of reclaimed self, yet the victories were Pyrrhic. The deeper we delved into our quest, the more apparent it became that the labyrinth we had escaped was merely a reflection of the greater maze that is society, a network of greed, apathy, and manipulation that thrived in the daylight. The realization was a descent into a new kind of darkness, a world where our ordeal was just a footnote in the endless cycle of exploitation. The unity we had found in our shared struggle began to fray, as the world we fought to change remained immovable, indifferent to the truths we laid bare. In the end, the labyrinth had indeed given us a gift wrapped in barbed wire, the gift of sight, to see the world not as it pretends to be, but as it truly is, flawed and unyielding. The scars we bore became the lenses through which we viewed our existence, reminders of a battle fought not just against the walls of a facility but against the very foundations of society. As I walked away from the echoes of our revelations, the facility a mere silhouette against the dying light, a chilling truth settled in my heart. We had believed ourselves to be escaping a labyrinth, stepping into the light of freedom and vindication. Instead, we found ourselves entering a deeper darkness, a world where our voices, however loud, could not pierce the veil of societal apathy. The world had moved on, and so had we, but in opposite directions. Our paths, once intertwined with hopes of change, now diverged into the silence of resignation. The labyrinth was not behind us, it was everywhere, its walls built from the very fabric of human indifference. And so, the darkness embraced us, not as victims but as heralds of an uncomfortable truth. The light we sought was but a mirage in the vast, unending night. The real labyrinth had no exit, its corridors etched into the world we called home. Our journey had changed us, but the world remained the same, a cruel twist in our quest for redemption. The facility faded into the distance, a monument not to our survival, but to the realization that some battles, once begun, can never truly be won.